Okay.
All right, we're good to go.
Morning, guys. Let me just pull this
Morning.
back up. So welcome to week 7. In some ways, it feels like we just got started. In other ways, it feels like we've been at it for a little bit. So this is our last week, and we have a couple of things we want to get to today. The first part is really, how do we help the helpers? And I'm going to explain that in a minute. Let's just start with a word of prayer, and then we'll get into it. So let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day, and we thank you for this class that we've been able to have together and to really enter into a space where we can talk about some things that we all go through, but sometimes are hard for us to deal with and to talk to each other about. And so we thank you for just being with us in this class and for guiding our conversation. And we'd ask that you continue to do that today. We ask all this in the name of your Son. Amen. So 2 things, helping the helpers and then sort of just landing the plane, sort of at the end, we'll sort of collect ourselves and ask a couple of questions about moving forward. This was the first slide of the first week. And I don't remember if I said this if I said it at all, or if I said it very well, but in one of the chapters of our country, when it came to how did we as a society sort of deal with mental illness, the Quakers were the ones who sort of landed front and center. And they said, we don't know, they created these intentional communities where they invited people with mental illness just to live among them. And what they said was, we don't know a thing, a blessed single thing about mental illness, but we know this: we are brethren and there are spaces between us. And so what they said was they created a community where they could live in those spaces with folks. And they didn't know exactly what they were doing, only that it was important to do. And they believed they were called to do it. And so when we started this whole series, we talked about creating brave space, which is how do we live amongst each other with the struggles that some of us face and that collectively we all share. In the last 50 years or so, we've landed in our country on really understanding mental illness through a medical lens. And it's true, those parts of it are actually true parts, but it's a narrow bandwidth. And so we've leaned into treatment as the way that we respond to folks who experience mental health issues. And while that's important, it's only a very narrow bandwidth, and it doesn't really capture that broader response that what we're all called to, which is why we've sort of focused the way we have in the preceding weeks. So today we're going to talk about sort of another ripple out. All of us at some point care for somebody, and oftentimes that can be a struggle. For some folks, it's their children at home. For some of us, it's been adult children. And we finding ourselves doing some things for our kids as adults that we didn't know when they were 10 that this was going to be where we landed. Sometimes it's a spouse or another loved one. Sometimes it's a parent. And if you remember a couple weeks ago when Jess and Ty were talking, there was a slide with a kid with this really big backpack, and Jess talked about the backpack that we all carry around. And sometimes that backpack gets pretty heavy with the load of caring for another person. And yet this is often a place where we do that in isolation. And so today we want to just talk through a little bit about how do we help each other when the help is to support somebody else who's providing care. So Jess and Tim are going to talk a little bit just for a couple minutes about their experience, and then we're going to open it up for conversation for the whole group. These are the discussion questions that I'm just putting up here now. We're going to take down a slide in a second so that we can all sort of see each other, but I want you to think through, in your experience or when you're listening, what makes it hard to tell somebody what's going on, what makes it hard to ask for help, and then what could be helpful in that experience. So Justin, Tim, I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right, thank you. Good morning. I brought Tim Fenchel with me into my square this morning for a couple of reasons. One is I've had a dental event that makes me less excited about talking, and especially robust here on this side of my face. And also because we share an experience together as parents of our son Isaiah, who struggles around wellness, and that comes out in his behavior typically. So that's a sort of a big heavy thing often that's in our backpack. It's sort of in our backpack every day, and we have times that are certainly better than others, different times of year. But I would say it's something that certainly affects our family, our relationship with him, every day.
Yeah, so Jess gave me about 12 hours warning that I was going to be a bigger part of this morning Sunday school class than we had planned on. But so the things I thought I'd just share a couple points real quick from my perspective, and they may or may not be applicable, but these are sort of my experience as a parent of someone who does struggle with his wellness. Excuse me. So one of them is just a struggle to sort of understand. Those of you who are in the field like Mark and Jess understand a little better. So just understanding exactly what the makeup of Isaiah's struggles are. And, having Jess in the field has been amazing for helping us, walk through this. But even still, when it's your own kid and you live with it all the time, sometimes it's sometimes hard to see all the little nuances and everything because you're so close to it.
Can I jump in on your comments?
Sure.
And then I would say, on that point, my perspective of that is, as a person who is supposed to know everything, I find myself mostly not knowing anything. And then I experience sort of personal experience of consistent failure because I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah, so it's understanding the exact makeup of how he's wired and what his struggles are, but then it's also just a struggle to understand why some things are so hard. And that really heightens the frustration level. Why is it so hard to put on our shoes in the morning? Why is it so hard just to go to school and, find a way to be motivated to get through school and come home? So there's a lot of things that are just hard for me to understand in general. One of the real difficulties that I've found the last 10 years or so is trying to tell the difference between what behavior comes out of his trauma and what behavior comes out of some of his struggles versus what behavior is just a regular 8 or 10 or 11-year-old boy.
Which is already a problem.
Right.
Yeah.
So
that's a big problem.
Trying to determine those two things and then how to respond to those has been a real difficult challenge. It probably would be better to err on consistency all the time, but we want to have moments of grace, especially in those moments where you think this comes out of a place of trauma where he really doesn't get it or he really struggles to understand, or versus just behavior that needs to be corrected. So that for me has been probably one of the biggest struggles in raising him and being a part of his life. In those moments, which happen hundreds of times in a day, trying to differentiate between both of those, trying to find the balance between that and how to respond to those things.
And so for us, I'm not sure that we do the best job of finding community for us around that. I think that's not something that you don't lead with this conversation with new friends, or but I do think that actually we kind of do. We talk a little bit more openly now about it than we ever used to. And I think it's been sort of a slow, gradual acceptance of the reality of our lives, that this isn't going to go away. In fact, it could probably get a little worse, and we're going to need people around that. But it's certainly something that I think is hard to talk frequently about. And how do you know when to even talk about it, or when to just keep going on around it? But it certainly is isolating, and it can feel lonely.
Yeah, and then that just impacts, you know, life at home when you have somebody who um, everything is hard at the moment. And we go through seasons where things are easier and seasons when things are more difficult. But when it's hard, it's literally everything that a human being does, from getting dressed to going about your day to responding to a conversation that you're supposed to be having. Everything that we do is just a heightened sense of difficulty all the time. And so then that just wears on patience, and it affects siblings and affects relationships inside of our home. And so it just gets very, very sort of it's very tiring when we're going through rough patches. And it has been pretty cyclical, I would say. We've gone throughout the calendar year where we have 3 or 4 months when things are really smooth, and then sometimes when it's pretty difficult. And so that leads me to the third thing I thought I would share is just my personal sort of ongoing fight for a desire of normalcy. And so there are days when I just wish things would be normal. I wish we could take him to one of his community basketball games and he could participate and not get frustrated at the smallest things, which other kids have the coping mechanisms to deal with, or you know, just the desire for wanting some kind of more sense of stability and normalcy. And so I think it would help me if I would sort of wave the white flag on that a little bit and say, you know, like Jess just said, we just come to accept the fact that we're looking at a long time of probably a struggle, potentially, you know, for his whole life. You know, we have seen some pretty great improvement in some areas, and we continue to hope and pray that that he will continue to figure things out. But in the back of my mind, there's always just sort of this constant sort of desire for normalcy. And that's just an area, I think, of brokenness of my own that I need to sort of surrender and learn to live with.
And then I think a lot about the trauma of our experiences with him. Like Tim and I, we go to work, and every time the phone rings, we're scared about what it's going to be. You know, we literally text through the day. Have you heard anything yet? I haven't heard anything yet either. Hope that's a good thing. So it's made a pretty big impact, but that's sort of a central organizing reality of our lives, of our married lives, of our family lives. And it's not necessarily a connection space with other people. Unless other people came and said, hey, we have sort of a similar reality. Our lives are organized around trying to help this person as well. Then you connect there, but we connect around the big sort of huge hairy object in our reality, or we connect in spite of it, but it's not something that you sort of lead with, which we probably should do more.
Yeah, so I think in some ways it's getting, there are some areas where things are improving for us. You know, he's getting older and he's understanding more. He's also getting older and he's getting bigger and he's getting stronger, and his frustrations come out in anger. So that's sort of a scary place. And we do recognize that there are some people who have much more difficult situations than we do. And so we just sort of try to find that balance. We chose this. I don't think we would go back and not choose it. I think we, you know, because we love him very, very much. And we're extremely grateful for him in our lives. But yeah, it's very hard. I was going somewhere with that point, and then I lost it somewhere in the middle. So
That's good. That's us. That's our deal.
Nice. Oh, so I'm going to pull their questions back up, and I'm going to just sort of open up the floor just a little bit. But I was struck by a couple things that you guys said that I've experienced. I mean, our daughter Becca was born deaf, and so there have been chapters to that too. But I was struck by the idea that you don't feel like you should lead with it. Like you don't lead with the conversation with, you know, these are the struggles that I'm going through. And then I was also sort of thinking about, sometimes you want to connect about anything but that. because you're dealing with that in your own family, and sort of to Tim's point of a sense of normalcy, you sort of fight for the areas of normalcy that you can still have in your life. And so when you're out with another couple, or you're talking to somebody in church, you just would rather not talk to about sort of those things. And then I've also, I shared my story a number of weeks ago, but one of the things that happened to me was when I would talk to folks about what I was experiencing, I would often have to process with the person their sudden understanding. So there's lots of people who didn't know that I struggled in the way that I did. And so when we would reveal that, they'd say, "Oh, no, not you." And then I would have to hum a few bars of it. "No, really." And so helping other people process, when I was really just hoping that they would say, "Wow, that kind of seems hard, and thanks for sharing." It just becomes, it felt like a more effort. It felt like sharing with somebody else was actually an additional weight in my backpack. And I just could barely handle my backpack at that moment anyway. So those are a couple of my just sort of reflections on what I just heard. I'm going to share the screen so that we can go back to our questions. And then I just want to open it up to the group for just reflection, response to what Tim and Jess shared, and maybe something that resonates with your experience. So I'm just going to throw it open to the group.
Well, I think one problem is we've got this self-reliant culture, and nobody wants anybody to think that we're not normal. But normal is a myth, in my opinion. Everybody's got their struggles. As a wise lady once told me, normal is a cycle on a washing machine. We all have our problems. We all have our difficulties. And people need to be sympathetic when somebody says, "Hey, I've got a problem." I mean, we have a friend who won't go to church because, they're all the perfect people with their plastic smiles. No, we're talking about the safe space. No, the church is one place that has to be a very safe space where you can spill all your problems and not be judged for it, but get help from people who, if there's anybody who can help, or at least empathy from, well, everybody should be capable of that.
Thanks. Yep. There's a gap between what we aspire to be, I think, and sort of how it works out in real life. And I think there's, I talk about the game face, the Sunday game face, where we're in a parking lot and we try to sort of marshal up our energy to show up okay, or at least to feel okay for an hour or 2 hours when we're around other people. And I think that's a pressure that we put on ourselves.
I think it's a very good point about your own self-perception, but the absolute truth is we all have issues. I'm an old man. I have 4 grown children. One of the things I have, my grown children remind me of all my issues all the time. So it's hard for me to think I'm normal because I get it all the time, whether it's my repeating myself, telling the same stupid stories, everything. But it's also, fortunately, our 4 children are relatively normal, and we don't have those kind of struggles. But we're a very social group. We have close friends, and one of our friends has we've known since he was born as a Down syndrome, and I've seen it firsthand with them. It affects their marriage. They struggle with all the stuff that has to be done with their son Alex. To me, and again, I'm not in that family, but I'm very close. I'm been Cookie Monster since Alex can talk, and we also go bowling. And when I see it, he's made my life rich and my family rich just being with him. But I know also that I've seen it with them and others that it's tough on the couple relationship. And I've heard somewhere somebody said the divorce rate for people with problematic children are much higher. And since I've seen it a few times, it's something you have to, I really think you have to reach out sometimes and not try to.
I think there's two ends of the spectrum, and telling someone what's going on is one, you already feel so hopeless and lost yourself, whether it's with your child or with issues that you have going on with yourself, and you don't want to be judged, and people do judge because that's just the way that humans are. And but then on the other end of the spectrum, sometimes you do ask for help and they don't know what to say, so they try to tell you how to fix it. And oftentimes that is much more harmful than helpful if a person isn't quite in the place where they're ready for that. It takes a lot of discernment on the helping party's end to kind of feel out, where is this person and how can I help them? I feel like the number one best thing you can ever do for anyone is just pray with them and just let them know that you're there. And also what makes it hard to ask for help is because you do want that sense of normalcy. You're going through every day where just it's a fight. Everything is a fight. And you just want to be with people in a normal place sometimes. And again, I think helpful help is just people who will say, we are here with you and we're going to help you walk through it, through every step. And prayer is just the biggest thing.
Nice, thanks. That's very powerful. I'm remembering back to one of the first weeks of the class when we talked about the Brene Brown video, where we have this sense that we need to fix it. And one of the things that's hard as a helper or a person coming alongside of somebody is this sense that we need to have the right words to say that will solve the problem, and we don't actually have them. And that's not actually, as you pointed out, it's not actually helpful. What's really more helpful is just saying, I'm not sure what to do, but it's the connection that's important. And I'm glad you shared this with me, and I'm going to pray for you. I've found one of the things that's been powerful in my life, and also I've tried to practice, and I think it's powerful in other people's lives, is just to reach out and say, I'm thinking about you. The idea that somebody is thinking about me and praying for me, or just remembering how challenging my space might be when we're not together and when they have no reason to think about me, but they reach out and text me and say, I'm just thinking about you today. I hope your day's going okay. They aren't actually making my day better. I mean, I still have to deal with all the stuff that's in my day, but the fact that another human being took it upon themselves to think about me and to sort of come alongside of me, even briefly, that is a really powerful things. When we are physically in our building, there's note cards in the men's room and the ladies' room. Taking one and writing something in it and sticking it in somebody's mailbox it has more power than I think we realize. It seems like a simple thing, but it's a powerful thing.
I would add to that too, Mark, the value of curiosity. We often feel sort of that pull when we're in those conversations toward the fixing side, as if I need to offer something or that I could resolve this for the other person, when if we could feel the pull over to the curiosity side, asking questions, just wondering, seeking to understand, because that's another way to connect and pulls a person in, rather than sort of sometimes we push people away in our efforts to fix or repair.
Nice.
I couldn't agree more. Just knowing people are thinking about you. I've been through my own tragedy. My wife of 46 plus years died in November. 4 children, 5 grandchildren, and phone calls from Pastor Mofel. We got connected with a Lutheran church up where we live. He came over. Actually, my son helped make that connection. He came over to the house several times when my wife was in the hospice care, and came over the day that she died. After she died, came over and prayed for us. And just not saying, okay, I know how to fix this, but just having people being there, just patting you on the back, giving you a hug, without telling me, okay, here's how you have to deal. Let me give you all the answers. Just those phone calls, just those hugs, squares.
I think another thing that can be really hard in terms of sharing with somebody else about the loved ones around you is if the loved one themselves has a stronger sense of privacy than you do, and so their lives are affecting you, and so you want to share that, and you want to, I need to talk, this is affecting me. But my loved one with the struggle isn't ready for anybody else to know what's going on, and doesn't isn't ready for that to be shared. And so then what do you do? I mean, that's-
Yeah, there's a complexity of sort of separating out who has what need. So as a caregiver or a loved one, I might have a need that's entirely my own, and but it's interwoven with the needs of the person that I'm trying to support, and they would be mortified if they knew that I was sharing some piece of it, even though I need it. I need to share it out of my own sense of what I need for my own wellness. It gets very knotty, very complex. Other thoughts on either what makes it hard or what would make it easier? Well, I think, thanks, Jess and Tim. Thanks for sharing. That's helpful. And I'm hoping that in this space, it's also the gift of going second. So that even beyond what we've said together in this class today, that we've planted some seeds where people know that it's as hard as it is to sometimes reach out to other people and ask for help. It's okay and it's important. And hopefully we're creating a little bit of a space around that, even in the conversation today. Let's segue into sort of where we would like to go, or how do we land this plane, sort of two things. So I'm just going to invite for a couple of minutes, just some reflections. So for people who have been with us for this trip, for this little journey in Sunday school, any thoughts about what really resonated with you over the weeks, or something that you say, wow, this seemed pretty important, I'd like to do more, or whatever, just any reflections out of the class. So I'm going to open it up to anybody.
Hey, Mark, I came into this a little late. I joined you guys the third week, but each week I noticed that there was quite a few people in attendance at this class, and that alone spoke to me that there's a need to think about these issues and process them. I think that's an encouraging sign for all of us.
Yeah, thanks. Other thoughts?
Well, Mark, I think you mentioned earlier that we all carry our shiny faces to church. We need to more often, when somebody asks the question, "How are you doing?" we need to answer honestly than with the shiny face. And I'll put a plug in April and May. We're doing a series on marriage, so there's a lot of shiny face that goes on in that whole circle. So we can continue this discussion in that set of Sunday school lessons also. So we just need to be honest with one another, which is so hard to do because we're afraid to be embarrassed. We're afraid to let people know how we really are doing and what's going on inside of us, because what do people think of us? And that's just because of, I think this society around us that they assume everybody's a pretty person and they want, that's what they would like us to be, but we're not, none of us are.
Yeah, I think, how do we establish sort of culturally in that sense, as we are a body, a discrete body of believers, we're in a relationship with each other. And how do we establish as a culture it's okay to not be okay? And in fact, how do we aspire to be the place where people go because they're not okay, not in spite of their not being okay, but they know it's really, this is a place. And it got said a couple of minutes ago, how do we have this be a safe place where that you bring your troubles to church rather than trying to leave your troubles at home and come to church in some other, in some other way. Brendan and I were the self-appointed informal hosts of the overflow room for a while. And what that did was it put me in proximity to the back door. And so people would come in a little bit late, and not usually, but sometimes people would be showing up in some form of not quite okay. And I can think of a couple of occasions. One, I saw a family roll in, and there was the one spot left that was for the visitor, so they took it. And I was going to open the door and go out and help them, and I realized they were just having a moment. So I stood inside in the hallway, and there was some conversation going on in the front seat, and they just drove off. And I realized that they just couldn't pull it together that day. I sent a text later, and I didn't say, "Hey, I saw you." I just said, "Hey, how's it going? I missed you." And then it's sort of, that sort of came out. We were able to have a conversation about just how some Sundays are just really hard. And then there was another time a woman came in, and she was just standing in the doorway, and I walked down to her and I said, "How are you going? How are you doing?" She burst into tears and she said, "I just can't do this today." And then she gave me her offering envelope and said, "Will you put this in the plate for me? But I just can't be here today." And so, there's moments, I think, where we come across that, but I think we should aspire to having these moments be more the norm, where we really understand that and I think, as Dave said, when we ask each other, "How are you doing?" and we mean it, and then we're honest when somebody asks us, and we mean that as well. And that's the life, that's putting feet and life to that mantra of moving towards it and sitting with it. Go ahead. Somebody's going to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah, just briefly on that point, Mark, that when we ask how you doing, be prepared for an honest answer, and be prepared to listen. Otherwise, don't ask how you're doing. If you're not really interested, if you're not curious, if you don't care, then don't ask. But if you really do care and you want to ask, then be prepared to listen. Be prepared to hear how people are doing, and understanding that they might not be doing all right.
Yeah, sometimes life is messy, and it's also it doesn't work on the right time schedule. And so sometimes when we ask and we realize, oh, there's something here, I'm going to have to stop what I'm doing and sort of recalibrate my day a little bit to include the conversation. It seems like it's needed.
Mark,
Sometimes,
go ahead.
sometimes I think that we forget that everyone's life has rain. And rain is in everyone's life, and we just, even in our own and in others. But we often want to just show the rainbow. It takes the most perfect few moments to see a rainbow. So if we think about that in the reality of life, the perfect is very rare. And we just have to know that that's true for almost everyone. Sometimes that rain is heavier, and sometimes it's not.
Mark, we had good friends that were almost like second parents to Ern and I when we were first married. And he would ask a question that didn't give you an out. He didn't ask how you were doing. he often asked, what are you struggling with today? And you couldn't, very seldom could you say you weren't struggling with something. So you had to answer him honestly instead of, he didn't give you an out. So sometimes it's how we ask questions is the kind of response we get.
And he
Yeah.
didn't take surface
I mean, we didn't take offense at that because he knew he cared for us.
Yeah.
We knew he was coming.
You brought up a point before that you're gonna be doing some marriage counseling things. So you're saying that all marriages aren't absolutely perfect in every which way?
Fight one, let me know. I like to fight him.
I used to joke, you know, I've been married 43 years, 45 years, and we've never had an argument, ever. No, wait a second. We haven't had an argument today. But the same thing you're saying about individuals, I think also applies to couples.
Hmm.
That there's issues too in most marriages. And fortunately, many times you overcome those issues. But as an individual, there's also that marriages could really become like one sometimes. And it's a different dynamic, of course, but it's there. It's important. And having a good marriage, overcoming issues strengthens both couples individually too.
And Mark, I think, you're talking about the Sunday school class that's coming up, but I think having more Sunday school classes like this with a focus on dealing with like struggles that are messy and giving people a space to talk about those messy things, I think it's just really helpful.
Yeah. So this sort of is sort of leading us a little bit towards some of the other questions on this slide. One of the things people have said is they're interested in sort of and returning to these spaces where we can just talk about things that are hard. In some of the weeks, if you have 45 minutes and we feel like, wow, we've sort of presented some information and people are sort of in the moment responding to it, but probably some of the richness of conversation would have happened the next day, or part 2 of the topic in the next week. And we were trying to balance out just sort of presenting some material and also giving people some time to interact with each other in real ways around it. So I think that you are right, that we need to have a space that's pretty regular, that facilitates the conversation with folks. And Dave, I'm going to circle back to what you said about sometimes it's the way we approach it or the words that we use. There's a pastor that I've gotten to know over the last couple of years, and he'll text me pretty randomly and say, "How can I pray for you?" He's not asking me how I'm doing. He's just like, "How can I pray for you?" And sometimes I'm really in a good spot, and I'm like, but when he asks that question, it forces me to sit for a second and say, well, how am I doing? And if I wanted somebody to pray, how would they pray pretty strategically about me? But it also prompts me to share with another human being what's going on with me today, where I might have just put my head down and sort of tried to sort of tough it through my day as best as I can. There's another human being asking me to reflect and to share in a pretty specific way. So I think you are right that it would help us to sort of and as Dan said, ask the question authentically and then be prepared to respond authentically when we get an answer. Which sort of brings us to another piece that we're and I don't have the answer. I'm laying this out as sort of a general question for reflection by the church leadership and also by all of us as part of the church. How do we, beyond having spaces where we create on purpose, where we can come and talk about things, how do we create sort of, and I said a culture earlier, but how do we sort of internalize this? How do we make this a part of our DNA, where people are leading each other's lives pretty authentically and deeply? It's easy it's easy to be a place where people show up with regularity on a Sunday and then go home. It's harder, I think, to be a place where people are up in each other's lives all the time. And I think there's great ways that we do that as a church, but I'm just sort of putting it out there for conversation beyond our time today to think about how do we create culturally as a church where people are up authentically in each other's lives. We're close to 10. Jess, do you have anything you want to?
I was just thinking about your example of when the pastor sends you that text and asks you how you are doing or what he can pray for. He's reinforcing your authenticity. And there are just simply not enough ways that we reinforce one another's authenticity, where we set the table on purpose and then reinforce that. But there's so many ways where we reinforce our inauthenticity. I'm just thinking about our Facebook posts. And, I just posted about Tim's birthday recently. And of course I pick like the good looking pictures. I didn't post any pictures of Tim chasing, Isaiah around the yard, trying to get him to come in the house or anything like that. And it makes us look pretty good. Like our pictures look nice. And people will comment, oh, you have such a great family. And I'm like, we do have a great family, but it's a real mess if you were here, in certain spaces. And how do we, there's just so many opportunities for us to be driven to look right. How do we find more ways to reinforce in a positive way for one another the opportunities to just be honest and say, wow, thanks so much for doing that. And also just remembering that that gift of going second. How do we give the gift of going second to other people? By just being really honest. When we tornado into the church on Sunday morning looking a mess, and I know my kid's not going to be wearing anything nice, and just be okay with that.
Yeah. I like the word authentic. It's one of those words that gets used a lot, but I like the word authentic because it sort of lives between on the one end of the continuum where I feel like I have to present myself in the Facebook acceptable way, or on the other hand where I have to walk around explaining to people what a hot mess I actually am. It's just sort of, it's although those things are true, but living authentically means that I sort of am real about myself, and I'm real about myself with other people.
Mark, there's a cliche that I think about, because I tend to want to, when somebody talks to me, I tend to want to fix things. That's just my personality. And someone told me once, I don't care what you know. I just need to know that you care. Because,
yep.
It's a crazy, and everybody probably heard it, but sometimes when I get ready to talk to someone, I've got to play that back in my mind so that I don't say something that's out of line.
Yep.
It's because it's what I'm trying to help in a way that doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yep. Nice. That is a good line, Dave. And as you heard, just Tim and Jeff both talk. Tim saying, well, I don't always understand it. And Jeff saying, well, I'm supposed to understand it, but because I make a career out of understanding this kind of thing, but I don't, as a parent, always understand it either. So one of my lines from myself is I just don't know stuff. And there are some things that I do know, but there's lots of things I don't. And usually when somebody is struggling, what they want from me isn't my knowledge. It's not my knowledge in itself. It's as you said, Dave, it's the caring. It's what we want from each other. It's what's helpful, actually. Any last thoughts from the group? Go ahead.
I like what you said about being authentic and pointing out the fact that so often part of what makes us feel like we're sort of a mess, I think, is that we can be both struggling and have things that are going well all at the same time. Like, so it isn't just like I'm either a complete mess and I need to tell you all of my struggles, and this is like, and I'm also like, I'm okay. Like, this is like, this thing went well about my week, even though this thing was like a mess. So I like that. Just to back up your term about authentic. Authentic means that you can You're not just one or the other. It's not like you're only okay all the time, and it's not like you're only a complete mess all the time. Like you can wrestle with all those parts of who you are, like, and all those different parts of what you're feeling, I think.
Nice.
I really appreciate your comment on caring. That to me is 99% of it. When I saw Pastor Mulfold yesterday for the first time in months, and I went out to shake his hand, he pushed it away. And he said, "Let me give you a hug."
Yeah. Yep. Yes. And so sometimes a hug is a thing that has so much more weight than a word, the right word, or even a good word. It's just a hug is a really important thing. Okay. So just, as we leave, if there are things that have struck you when you think back on it, or things that you say, wow, I think we could use some more conversation around this or something. Dave has mentioned that there's going to be a marriage class coming up. And so that's a space where I think we can talk about some things that we all are universally, things that we experience. But if there's things that are on your mind or on your heart, let people know, and then we can see how we circle back to some of those things. I'm going to close this in prayer. And then I don't know if somebody can hit the unrecord button, but we'll do that. So let me close in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you again for this time that we've had, and we thank you that you are a God who cares for us and who is present with us in our struggles, and who knows what we're going through and has promised to care for us even when it feels pretty dark to us. We also thank you that you have created us to be in community with each other, and that the way that you provide for us in our hard spots is oftentimes through the work of someone else that you've put in our life. And so we'd ask that you will help us not only to reach out to folks when we need that, but also be the kind of person and the group of people that come alongside folks and reinforce that idea, as Justice said, that it really is okay to not be okay, and it's okay to let other people in a little bit and know about some of the hardships that we're going through. We thank you again for just the bringing us together as a body, and we'd ask now as we go into our worship service that you will still our hearts and prepare us for what comes in front of us today. And we ask all of this in the name of your Son. Amen. All right, thank you guys.
Mark and Jess, thank you so much. This has been extremely helpful. The CE committee is going to continue our conversation about where to go from here, and you've given us some good ideas. So we'll be in touch again. And thank you everyone for your part in this as well. If you have any ideas as to what you'd like to see happen as we build on what we've already put in place, let me know, let Sharon know. We're on the CE committee, and we can start using those ideas to try and make more things happen. So thank you, Tim, as well, for your sharing. And thanks for all the resources you guys brought from Access Services. I think it's been one of our best Sunday school offerings ever. So thank you all. Thank you all. Trust you have a good Lord's Day, and see you in corporate worship.